The cold wind cut through the narrow alley, its sharp gusts swirling the dirt around the girl huddled against the brick wall. Her thin, ragged clothes did little to protect her from the chill, but she was used to it. No one ever stopped to help. No one ever cared. The city had a way of forgetting the people it didn't want to remember. She had learned that the hard way. Her name was Sophia. She was only 16, but the harshness of the streets had aged her beyond her years. Tonight, like every other, she would wait for the darkness to swallow her whole. A few coins, maybe some leftovers, and then a corner to sleep in. That was all she could expect. But that night was different. She could feel it in the air, the tension thick and palpable, as if something or someone was about to change her fate forever. Sophia's hands shook as she reached into the crumpled paper bag that had become her lifeline. It was a piece of stale bread, but hunger made even the simplest of meals feel like a treasure. She tore off a piece and chewed slowly, her mind wandering to thoughts of her father, whom she had never met. She'd heard the whispers, the rumors of a powerful man with ties to the darkest corners of the city, someone who ruled the underworld with an iron fist. But for Sophia, those were just stories, ones told to frighten children. At least, that's what she told herself every time she saw his face in her dreams. She was snapped out of her thoughts when the sound of footsteps approached. Her heart clenched as she instinctively shrunk into the shadows. It was him, Ethan, the school bully. He was the type of person who tormented others just because it made him feel bigger. He had no idea who Sophia was or what she could be capable of. To him, she was just another weak, invisible girl, someone he could push around with no consequences. "Hey, freak!" Ethan's voice cut through the night like a knife. "What's the matter, lost your way home?" He sneered, his eyes scanning her from head to toe with a look of disgust. His friends, a group of high school jocks, snickered behind him. Sophia stood up, her face expressionless. She had learned long ago to keep her emotions buried deep inside. Letting them show only invited more pain. "I'm not lost," she said softly, trying to ignore the venom in his voice. "Just staying out of your way." "Ha!" Ethan laughed, stepping closer and kicking the bag of bread out of her hands. It landed in the dirt, the bread scattered and crushed. "What do you think you're gonna do about it, huh?" Sophia didn't answer. Instead, she bent down and started gathering the crumbs, not wanting to make a scene. She could feel the eyes of the others on her, their laughter loud and mocking. But just as Ethan reached down to grab her arm, something changed. "Leave her alone." The voice was low and steady, but there was an undeniable authority in it. Ethan froze, his hand hovering inches from Sophia's arm. He turned slowly, eyes widening as he saw who had spoken. Standing in the alleyway was a tall figure dressed in a sharp black suit. His presence was commanding, his expression unreadable. It was a man Sophia had never seen before, but there was something about him, a cold intensity that made even Ethan hesitate. "Who the hell are you?" Ethan demanded, his bravado faltering. The man stepped forward, his gaze never leaving Ethan. "I'm someone you don't want to mess with," he said quietly, his voice carrying a chill that made the temperature around them seem to drop. "Now walk away before things get worse." For a moment the air was thick with tension. Ethan and his friends exchanged uncertain glances, but after a long pause they backed away. Ethan shot Sophia one last venomous glare before turning and walking off with his crew. Sophia remained on the ground, her heart pounding. Who was this man? And why had he stepped in? The stranger approached her slowly, his polished shoes clicking against the pavement. "You're lucky I happened to be nearby," he said, his voice now softer, almost curious. "Not everyone would have come to your aid." Sophia didn't answer. She just stared up at him, wary but grateful. There was something oddly familiar about him, though she couldn't place it. He looked like someone who belonged to a world she had never known, a world far removed from the streets she had come to call home. "Do you need help?" he asked, his tone softer now, though there was still an edge of command in his words. Sophia hesitated, her mind racing. She wanted to say no, to send him away and keep to herself as she always had, but something inside her, the part of her that still longed for connection, for someone to care, compelled her to nod. Maybe just for tonight," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. The man extended his hand. "Come with me." Sophia looked at his hand, unsure, but then slowly reached up, letting him pull her to her feet. She noticed the way his hand was firm, steady, as if he had no doubt in his ability to handle anything that came his way. It was the way he held himself that unnerved her most. As they walked through the alley, Sophia couldn't help but wonder what kind of man would risk his own safety for someone like her. There was something about him, something dangerous perhaps, but also protective, like a shield she had never known. She wasn't sure if she could trust him, but for the first time in a long while, she felt a glimmer of hope. Sophia followed, the man through the narrow, dimly lit streets, her mind racing with questions. Who was he? Why had he helped her? And most importantly, what did he want in return? The man walked with purpose, his every step echoing through the quiet city streets. Sophia stayed close behind, careful not to make a sound. Despite the chill in the air, she couldn't shake the warmth that had started to spread through her, a feeling she hadn't had in so long. It was unsettling, like a dream she didn't want to wake up from. They didn't speak as they made their way through the alleyways, and for a while Sophia allowed herself to simply follow. She had no destination of her own, no sense of home to return to. She was a ghost, passing through life unnoticed, but tonight things felt different. After what seemed like an eternity, they arrived at a large, imposing building. Sophia looked up in awe as the gates, made of dark iron, loomed in front of her. It was a stark contrast to the crumbling buildings and dark alleys she was used to. The marble steps leading up to the entrance were spotless, and the lights that flickered overhead illuminated a sense of power and wealth. The man turned to her. "This is my place," he said simply, his tone offering no explanation, but everything in his gaze. "You're safe here." Sophia hesitated. She had never been this close to such luxury before. She could barely imagine what kind of life someone lived in a place like this, but the pull of curiosity and something else, something deeper, compelled her to follow him inside. The door opened with a soft creak, revealing a lavish interior. Softer light filled the room, and plush furniture adorned every corner. It was warm inside, much warmer than the streets she had known. For a moment, Sophia felt a rush of emotions, fear, disbelief, hope, all blending together. The man gestured for her to sit. She complied, taking a seat on one of the velvet couches, her body still tense but relieved to be off the cold streets. She glanced around, unable to comprehend how someone like him could live in such a place. Everything about it was the opposite of her life, the opposite of everything she knew. "Water?" he asked, his voice steady as ever. "Yes," she replied, her voice hoarse. She hadn't realized how thirsty she was until he asked. He nodded and disappeared into another room, leaving Sophia alone in the expansive living room. She took a deep breath, trying to make sense of everything. The man had stepped in to defend her, but why? It didn't add up. She was just a homeless girl, a nobody to most people. She ran her fingers through her tangled hair, wondering how long it would take for him to realize he had made a mistake by helping her. There was no place for her in a world like this, a world where everything seemed so perfect and polished. A few moments later, he returned, holding a glass of water. He handed it to her without a word, his expression unreadable. Sophia took the glass, her hands trembling as she brought it to her lips. The water was cold and refreshing, and for the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to relax, if only a little. The man watched her silently, his eyes calculating as if he were trying to piece together a puzzle he couldn't quite solve. Finally, after a long pause, he spoke. "You're not just some girl off the streets, are you?" he asked, his voice gentle but probing. Sophia froze, the glass in her hand suddenly feeling heavier. She didn't respond right away, her mind swirling. "I don't know what you mean," she said, her voice small. The man raised an eyebrow. "You don't have to lie to me," he said, his tone soft but firm. "I've seen your kind before." Sophia's heart skipped a beat. His kind? What did that mean? "Look," he continued, his eyes softening slightly, "I'm not here to hurt you, but I can tell there's something more to you than meets the eye, and I can help you." Sophia set the glass down on the table beside her. The room suddenly felt smaller, like the walls were closing in around her. "Help me?" she asked, her voice barely audible. "What could you possibly do for me?" The man's gaze never wavered. "You don't realize it, but you're tied to something much bigger than you think." Sophia's pulse quickened. "What do you mean?" He leaned back in his chair, folding his arms across his chest. "Your father, he's someone I know, a man with power." The words hung in the air like a thunderclap, and for a brief moment, Sophia couldn't breathe. She stared at him, trying to make sense of his words. "My father?" she repeated, her voice cracking. "I don't have a father." The man's gaze softened, his eyes dark with understanding. "You do, Sophia, and he's someone who could change everything for you." Sophia's mind raced as the truth began to settle in. For the first time, the weight of her past, the whispers, the stories, began to make sense. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The man stood up slowly, his expression becoming harder. "My name is Marco, and your father is someone who doesn't take kindly to anyone hurting his own." A chill ran down Sophia's spine, as the reality of the situation hit her. She had never known her father, but Marco's words carried a weight she couldn't ignore. The question now wasn't just who her father was, it was what would happen when she found him. Sophia sat in silence, her mind reeling from Marco's words. Her father, the man she had never known, the figure who had haunted her. Thoughts in fleeting moments was connected to someone like Marco. She tried to grasp the weight of the revelation, but it felt like trying to hold on to smoke, slipping through her fingers, impossible to define. Marco, seemingly unbothered by the heavy silence, walked over to a dark wood cabinet and poured himself a drink. The sound of ice clinking against glass echoed in the otherwise quiet room. He didn't offer her another glass of water, though she could tell she needed it, her throat dry from the shock of the conversation. Instead, he took a sip, the amber liquid swirling inside the glass. "Why are you telling me this?" Sophia finally broke the silence, her voice sharp with a mix of fear and disbelief. "What do you want from me?" Marco set the glass down and turned to face her, his expression unreadable. "I don't want anything from you, Sophia, but your life is about to change, whether you want it to or not. You're connected to things far beyond your understanding, your father's world. It's not one you can walk away from, not without consequences." Sophia's heart raced. She had always thought her life was simple, even if it was a life spent on the streets. She was a ghost, an invisible figure passing through the world unnoticed. Now, she was thrust into something that felt far too big for her. The idea that her father was someone powerful, dangerous perhaps, was a reality she couldn't wrap her mind around. "How do you know all this?" Sophia asked, her voice shaky. "And why? Does it matter now?" Marco stepped closer, his eyes narrowing with something that resembled curiosity. "Because your father has been looking for you. He's always known you were out here, and you've been walking a dangerous line, Sophia. If you keep hiding from him, there will be others who come after you, people who don't care about what happens to a girl like you." The mention of others sent a cold shiver down Sophia's spine. She hadn't realized how vulnerable she was, how many dangers lurked just outside the fringes of her reality. She was used to fending for herself, surviving by instinct. But now, in this new world Marco spoke of, she felt small and powerless. "I don't want to be part of that world," she whispered, more to herself than to Marco. "I don't want to know him. My life, it's been mine to control. I've survived without him." Marco tilted his head, studying her as if trying to gauge her reaction. "You don't have a choice in this, Sophia. Whether you want to or not, you're already part of it. And there are forces at play here that are much bigger than you or me." Sophia looked up at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and defiance. She couldn't let this be her life. She couldn't let some mafia world swallow her whole. The streets had already taken so much from her. She wasn't going to let it take her hope too. "I don't care who my father is," she said, her voice shaking but determined. "I don't want to be part of any world where people are afraid to be themselves. I won't let anyone use me." Marco's gaze softened just a fraction, but his words remained firm. "I'm not telling you this to scare you, Sophia. I'm telling you because there's a choice to make. The streets you've known, they'll become far more dangerous if you don't step up, and you're not as alone as you think. There are allies, people who can help you. Your father's enemies, though, they won't stop until they find you." Sophia swallowed hard, her mind spinning with the implications of what he was saying. Allies? Enemies? She was just a girl who had survived on the streets. How was she supposed to navigate a world like this? For the first time in her life, Sophia felt the weight of something she couldn't fight on her own. There were forces she didn't understand, forces that had been circling her, and she had no way of knowing who could be trusted or who would betray her. "You're not alone anymore," Marco continued, his voice quieter now, almost soothing. "But if you choose to step into this world, there's no turning back. You'll need to be stronger than you ever imagined, and the price of your silence will cost more than just your freedom." Sophia stood up suddenly, her legs unsteady beneath her. "I don't know if I'm ready for this," she said, her voice tight. "I don't know if I can be part of whatever this is." Marco's gaze hardened, his expression shifting. "You don't have a choice. Your past is coming for you, Sophia, and it's only a matter of time before it finds you. The sooner you understand that, the sooner you can prepare." He was right. She knew that now. The question wasn't if her father's world would come for her. It was when. And when it did, there was no running away. As Sophia looked out the window, the city lights below seemed to blur together in a sea of possibilities and dangers. Her life was no longer just about survival. It was about something much darker, much larger. But even as the weight of her new reality settled in, Sophia felt a flicker of something else, a burning desire to take control of her fate. to face whatever came with her head held high. Her past might have been forgotten by the world, but she wasn't going to let it define her future. Sophia spent the rest of the night tossing and turning, the weight of Marco's words haunting her thoughts. The luxurious room, the warmth, the promise of safety, none of it mattered anymore. Her mind couldn't escape the words, "your father," and the chilling implication that her life had always been intertwined with a world she had no part in. She sat by the window, staring out at the city below. It was still dark, the city lights flickering like 1,000 tiny stars, but to Sophia, they felt distant, foreign. The streets had always been her home. The constant hustle, the search for food, the ever-present fear of danger. It was all she knew. And now, Marco had shown her a different reality, one where power ruled and nothing was as simple as it seemed. Sophia knew she couldn't stay in this place forever. She wasn't meant for this life, not for the wealth, the secrets, or the men in suits who whispered in the shadows. Her heart longed for something simpler, something pure. But the truth was, she couldn't ignore what Marco had said. Her father was out there, and whether she wanted to face him or not, his world was about to collide with hers. The sound of footsteps in the hallway interrupted her thoughts. Marco appeared in the doorway, his expression as unreadable as ever. His eyes studied her, perhaps searching for something in her gaze, but she refused to look away. She wouldn't let him see her weakness. Not now. "How are you feeling?" Marco's voice was calm, almost too calm. "I don't know," Sophia replied honestly. She didn't have the words to explain the confusion churning inside her. "I don't know what to think." Marco nodded slowly, stepping into the room. He didn't sit down this time, but instead stood by the door, his hands clasped in front of him. "I know this is a lot to take in, but you need to understand something." He paused as if carefully considering his words. "Your father is a powerful man, a dangerous one, but he's also a man who keeps his promises. And whether you like it or not, you're a part of his world now." Sophia felt her breath catch in her throat. She had been waiting for him to say something like that, but hearing it made it real. This wasn't some fantasy or dream. This was her reality now, and as much as she wanted to deny it, part of her already knew that she couldn't run from it. "What kind of man is he?" she asked quietly, her voice almost a whisper. "What does he want with me?" Marco's expression softened, and for the first time since they met, there was a flicker of something, compassion, regret. "I'm not the one who should tell you about him, Sophia. That's something you need to hear from him. But I can tell you this. Your father didn't just abandon you. He's been looking for you for years. He didn't know where you were, but he knew you were out there." Sophia closed her eyes, trying to make sense of this new piece of the puzzle. Her father hadn't abandoned her. He'd been searching for her all this time. It didn't make sense. If that was true, why hadn't anyone told her? Why hadn't she been told the truth? "You mean all this time I've been living in the streets, and he knew?" Sophia's voice broke, her hands gripping the edge of the windowsill, as if the coldness of the glass could somehow steady her racing heart. "Yes," Marco said gently, his voice a bit softer now, "but he couldn't risk exposing you, not until the time was right, and that time is now." Sophia looked at him, her gaze fierce. "Why is now the right time?" Marco sighed, stepping closer. "Because things are changing. Your father's enemies are closing in, and they know you exist now. They know you're alive." Sophia recoiled slightly, a rush of panic flooding her chest. "Enemies? What enemies? What kind of people would come after me? I'm just a girl who's tied to something much bigger than she realizes." Marco finished for her, his tone hardening once again. "I told you, Sophia, you don't get to choose your family, and you don't get to choose the world you were born into." Sophia swallowed hard, the weight of Marco's words crashing over her. She had spent her entire life trying to disappear, trying to be invisible so she wouldn't have to deal with the pain of rejection. Now she was thrust into a world where being invisible wasn't even an option. It was terrifying, but in a strange way it was also empowering. The girl who had spent her life alone, unnoticed, was now a person of interest to the most powerful people in the city. "What happens now?" she asked, the words tasting foreign on her tongue. Marco gave her a sharp look, his eyes calculating. "Now, you prepare. Your father will come for you. It's only a matter of time before he makes contact. And when that happens, you'll have a choice: stay hidden and live a life of fear, or accept the reality of your bloodline and stand by his side." Sophia's heart pounded in her chest. There was no way to run from this. She couldn't go back to the life she had, and maybe, just maybe, the idea of having power, of being someone important didn't sound so bad, but something inside her resisted. She didn't want to be a pawn in a game she didn't understand. She didn't want to live a life built on lies and power struggles. There had to be another way. But for now, all she could do was wait. Wait for the inevitable. Wait for her father. Wait for the storm to come. The next few days blurred together for Sophia. She spent her time in the lavish apartment, trying to absorb everything Marco had told her. Each conversation with him felt like a tug-of-war between curiosity and fear. He was right. Her life was changing, but she still didn't understand how or why it was happening. Marco had arranged for her to stay in a room on the top floor, offering her comfort and safety she hadn't known in years. She could hear the city buzzing beneath her, the distant hum of the streets that had once been her world. Now she was removed from it all. The reality of what had been her existence for so long seemed far away, like a dream she couldn't wake up from. Sophia spent most of her days pacing around the apartment, trying to shake the anxiety that clung to her like a second skin. At times, she wanted to leave, run back to the only life. She knew, the life where the rules were simple. Survive, don't trust anyone, and keep your head down. But she also knew that running was no longer an option. Not when her father's enemies were after her, not when her bloodline was tied to something so dangerous, so powerful. It was late one evening when she heard the knock, a single sharp rap on the door. Sophia froze. She hadn't expected any visitors, especially not after Marco's warning about her father's enemies. Her heart raced as she approached the door, cautiously peeking through the small crack between it and the wall. "Who is it?" she called out, trying to keep the tremor out of her voice. The voice that responded was smooth, calm, and undeniably authoritative. "Marco sent me. I'm here to speak with you." Sophia's hand hovered over the doorknob, unsure of whether to open it. She had grown accustomed to the unfamiliar, but still, something about this stranger set her nerves on edge. She could feel a sense of unease creep down her spine, but she knew she had no choice. She had to know what was happening. Reluctantly, she opened the door. The man standing before her was tall, with dark eyes that seemed to miss nothing. His suit was impeccably tailored, and his presence radiated confidence. He stepped inside without waiting for an invitation, his eyes scanning the room with cold efficiency. "I'm Vincent," he said, his voice low and precise. "Marco sent me to prepare you." Sophia's heart skipped a beat. Prepare me? For what? She could feel the weight of her words in the air, like they were the start of something she wasn't ready for. Vincent didn't answer immediately. He glanced around the room briefly, as if ensuring no one else was nearby. Then he turned his gaze back to Sophia, his expression serious. "For your father's arrival. He will be here soon." Sophia's stomach dropped. The weight of his words settled on her like a boulder. The thought of meeting her father, the man whose world she knew nothing about, terrified her. What would he want from her? What kind of man was he, really? "Marco said you're ready, but I don't know if you truly are," Vincent continued, his eyes narrowing slightly as he took a step toward her. "You've been living on your own for a long time. Your father's world. It's not like what you're used to." Sophia didn't know how to respond. All she could do was nod, her throat tight as she tried to process everything. "I don't know if I'm ready," she admitted quietly. "I've never been a part of any world like this." Vincent's gaze softened for the briefest moment, but the hardness returned quickly. "No one is ready for this, Sophia, but your father has waited long enough. It's time you understood the role you'll play in his world." Sophia stepped back, unsure of how to respond. "What does that mean? What role?" Vincent reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small silver envelope. He handed it to her without saying a word. Sophia took it from him, her fingers trembling slightly as she ripped it open. Inside was a single piece of paper, written in elegant, precise handwriting. The words on the page were simple, but the weight of them was crushing. "I will meet you tomorrow night. You will come to me. There is no turning back." Sophia read the message over and over, trying to understand it, trying to convince herself that it was just a letter, just words on a page. But deep down, she knew that everything was about to change. Her father, whoever he was, had made his move tomorrow night. The reality of it hit her like a punch to the gut. She couldn't ignore it anymore. The man who had abandoned her, who had been searching for her all these years, was coming, and he was coming for her. "You'll need to be prepared," Vincent said, his voice snapping Sophia out of her daze. "You can't be the same girl you were before. Not anymore." Sophia clenched the letter in her hand. "What does that mean?" Vincent looked at her, his expression unreadable. "It means you need to decide who you're going to be, the girl who hides in the shadows or the one who stands beside him." Sophia felt a knot tighten in her chest. She had always fought for survival, but now she was being asked to make a choice that would define her. There was no going back from this. Her life had been one of survival, of fading into the background, but tomorrow night she would be forced to step into the light. A new chapter was about to begin, one that she couldn't avoid, no matter how much she wanted to. The night felt heavier than usual. Sophia stood by the window, the city below her alive with motion, yet she felt like she was in a bubble, trapped between the life she once knew and the one she was being forced into. The letter in her hand felt like a lifeline and a weight, both pulling her in opposite directions. She could feel the uncertainty gnawing at her, but it was no use pretending she had any control over what was about to happen. Her father, the man she'd never known, never been allowed to know, the one who had been searching for her, watching her from the shadows, waiting for the moment to bring her into his world. And that moment, it seemed, was now. Sophia had no idea what to expect. She had heard whispers of Mafia families, of ruthless men who ruled with fear and violence, but it always felt like a far-off world, something that didn't concern her, something that belonged to other people. Now, it was her world, or at least, it was about to be. She didn't know what kind of man her father was, but she had a sinking feeling she wasn't going to like him. The man who had abandoned her, who had left her to fend for herself in a world that didn't care. What could he possibly want with her now? And why had he waited so long to come for her? Marco's words echoed in her mind. Your father has been looking for you. He didn't know where you were, but he knew you were out there. She had heard about men like him, the ones who operated in the shadows, pulling strings and making deals in places she had never dared to tread. But could she really be a part of that world? Would she ever be more than just a pawn in his game? A knock at the door startled her from her thoughts, and she jumped, her heart racing. She had been expecting it, but the sound still sent a ripple of panic through her. It's time, Vincent's voice called from the other side. Sophia took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. She had no choice but to face what awaited her. The truth, whether she was ready for it or not, was just beyond that door. She opened it, her gaze meeting Vincent's calm, assessing eyes. Ready? He asked, though the word itself felt like a command. I don't know, Sophia whispered, but there was no turning back now. But I have to go. Vincent didn't answer. He simply nodded and motioned for her to follow. As they made their way through the hallway, Sophia felt like she was walking in a dream, or perhaps a nightmare. The air seemed to grow colder, thicker, and each step she took felt heavier than the last. They descended in silence, passing through corridors that felt more like hallways to a prison than a luxurious mansion. Finally, they arrived at a large, reinforced steel door, its surface cold and imposing. Vincent stopped in front of it and turned to Sophia. This is where it starts, he said, his voice quieter now. Your father is inside. He's been waiting for you. Sophia's stomach churned, waiting for her. The words echoed in her mind like a drumbeat. Vincent gave her a quick look, one that almost seemed like a warning, but he didn't say anything more. He simply pressed a button on the wall, and the door opened with a soft hiss, revealing a dark, spacious room beyond. The moment Sophia stepped inside, she felt the shift in the air. It was heavier, denser. The room was lit only by dim, ambient light, casting long shadows along the walls. And sitting at the center of it all, behind an enormous mahogany desk, was a man whose presence filled the room without him even needing to move. Sophia's heart skipped a beat as her eyes met his. He was tall, broad-shouldered, his features sharp and imposing. His dark eyes locked onto hers immediately, and despite the coldness of his gaze, there was something unmistakably familiar about him, something in the shape of his face, the way he held himself. It was him, her father. Sophia, he said, his voice deep and commanding. The way he said her name made her blood run cold, and she immediately understood that this man was not someone you could defy, not someone who could be ignored. She stood frozen, unable to move or speak. Her mind was a whirlwind of confusion, fear, and disbelief. This was the man who had abandoned her, the man who had allowed her to suffer all those years, and now he was here, sitting in front of her, looking at her like she was nothing more than a stranger. You've grown up well, he continued, his gaze never leaving hers. But you are not yet the person I need you to be. His words hit her like a slap. Sophia took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. I don't understand, she said, her voice trembling. You've been looking for me all this time, but you never even tried to contact me. I had to survive on my own. Her father's eyes flickered, a brief moment of something unrecognizable crossing his features. But then it was gone, replaced by his usual cold composure. The streets weren't meant to be your home, he said, his tone unyielding. But your survivals, it's a sign of strength, and I admire that. But now you are no longer a child. You are part of my world, and you need to accept that. Sophia's heart hammered in her chest, but she forced herself to stand tall. "I don't want your world," she said, each word heavier than the last. "I never asked for it." Her father's expression darkened, and he leaned forward slightly, his eyes narrowing. "You don't have a choice. You are my daughter, and you will play the role I assign you, whether you like it or not." Sophia swallowed hard, feeling a wave of panic rise inside her. The reality of her situation was sinking in. There was no escaping this world, not anymore. And just as she was about to say something, anything, a figure stepped out of the shadows. Marco. He moved toward her, his expression unreadable. "You don't have to do this alone, Sophia," he said, his voice calm. "We're all part of this now, and if you want out, you'll have to fight for it." Sophia looked from her father to Marco, feeling like she was being pulled in two different directions. Was this her choice to make, or had the moment of choice already passed? Sophia's chest tightened as her father's words echoed in her mind. There was no escaping this. She was tied to a world of power and violence she hadn't even begun to understand. Every fiber of her being wanted to reject it, to turn away from him and everything he represented, but a gnawing truth lingered at the back of her mind. She didn't have a choice. Her father's gaze didn't waver. It was as if he had been expecting her resistance, as if he had already planned for this moment. "You think you have a choice?" he asked, his voice quiet but filled with an authority that sent chills down Sophia's spine. "You're part of my bloodline, Sophia, and in this world your blood means everything." Sophia felt a knot in her throat. She couldn't deny it anymore. The man sitting before her was her father, and no matter how much she wanted to escape, she was tied to him in ways she couldn't untangle. But even as the weight of the realization pressed down on her, she still couldn't bring herself to accept his world. Marco, who had silently observed the exchange, stepped forward. "She's not ready," he said, his tone unwavering, "and forcing her into this won't change that." Her father turned his eyes toward Marco, and for the first time, Sophia noticed the faintest flicker of irritation in his expression. "I don't need her to be ready. I need her to understand her place. She's not a child anymore." The words hung heavy in the air, and Sophia clenched her fists at her sides. The man who had abandoned her, the man who had left her to survive on the cold streets, was now talking about her like she was a piece in his game, a pawn, meant to be moved at his will. But she was no pawn. She was Sophia, a girl who had lived through the worst the world had to offer, and she wasn't about to let anyone, not even her father, dictate who she was or what she could become. "Is that all I am to you?" Sophia asked, her voice trembling with a mix of anger and pain. "A piece to move around? A role to play?" Her father's gaze softened, just for a moment, and in that instant, Sophia saw something else, a flicker of regret, maybe even a trace of guilt, but it was gone as quickly as it had come. "You don't understand, Sophia," he said, his voice quieter, almost gentle. "This world doesn't work the way you think. It's not about right or wrong. It's about power and survival. I've built something that takes strength, something that can't be broken by weakness. You don't have the luxury of choice in a world like mine." Sophia shook her head, her chest tightening. "I didn't choose to be here. I didn't choose to be your daughter." "No," he agreed, "but you are, and that's why you're here, because whether you want it or not, this is your legacy." A deep silence settled between them, and Sophia's mind raced. The pieces were starting to fall into place, but they didn't make the picture any clearer. All her life, she had thought that surviving on the streets was the hardest thing she would ever do. But now, as she stood before her father, the man who was the source of all her pain and confusion, she realized that surviving the streets was nothing compared to surviving his world. Marco, sensing her internal battle, stepped toward her. "Your father's right about one thing," he said, his voice softer. "You don't have a choice. Not yet. But that doesn't mean you have to surrender to everything he wants. You can still fight for yourself. You can still carve your own path, Sophia, but it will be a hard fight." Sophia's gaze flicked to Marco, her mind still spinning. She wanted to believe him, wanted to believe that she could somehow escape this fate, but part of her feared that Marco too was just another player in a game she didn't understand, another pawn trying to pull her in different directions. Her father leaned forward, his hands clasped together on the desk. "Make no mistake, Sophia. The choice isn't whether or not you will be a part of this world. The choice is whether you will be a leader in it or whether you will remain a follower." Sophia took a step back, trying to clear her head. The weight of her father's words was suffocating, and she could feel the pressure of their implications pressing in on her. She had always believed in her ability to survive, but this was different. This was a world of power, loyalty, and violence. A world where blood ran thick and nothing was as simple as right and wrong. Marco's voice interrupted her thoughts. "We don't have to do this today," he said, his eyes locking with hers. "I can help you, but it's up to you to decide what kind of person you want to be." Sophia stared at Marco, his words offering a glimmer of hope in an otherwise dark room. But was it enough? Was it enough to trust him? To trust anyone in this world that had been built on lies and manipulation? She turned back to her father, the man who had set all of this into motion. "I don't want to be a part of your world," she said, her voice firm, though she could feel the doubt creeping in at the edges of her thoughts. "I want to carve my own path, make my own choices, even if it's harder." Her father regarded her for a long moment, and Sophia could feel the weight of his gaze, measuring, calculating. "I hope you understand the consequences of your choice, Sophia. I hope you're ready for what comes next." With that he stood, his towering figure casting a long shadow over the room. "Marco will show you the way. But remember, no one ever truly escapes this life, and if you try, there will be consequences." The door clicked shut behind him, leaving Sophia standing alone with Marco. The air felt charged, like a storm was building just on the horizon. "You don't have to make any decisions right now," Marco said, his voice quiet. "But you need to understand that this life has a way of swallowing people whole. You can either be swallowed or you can learn to fight back." Sophia stared out the window, the city lights a blur below her. The future was uncertain, the choices ahead murky. But one thing was clear: whatever path she chose, it would define her, and there would be no turning back. Sophia stood in the quiet of the room, the weight of her father's words hanging heavy in the air. She had made her choice, or at least she thought she had. Her mind was a swirling storm of uncertainty, every choice she had to make from here on out feeling more monumental than the last. Marco stood by the window, his back turned to her, silently observing her as if he could see into her very soul. He had given her the space to think, but Sophia knew there was no escaping the reality she now faced. The city below seemed distant, as if the noise and chaos of the streets had been muted, replaced by the cold, unrelenting silence of the world she had been thrust into. "You don't have to do this alone, you know," Marco said softly, his voice steady though there was a note of concern in it. He turned to face her, his eyes meeting hers. "I can help you, Sophia. I can teach you what you need to know to survive in this world." Sophia's chest tightened at his words. She knew Marco wasn't just talking about the physical dangers of the underworld, he was talking about the mental and emotional toll it would take. The games, the manipulation, the constant balancing act of power and weakness. It was a world where trust was a luxury and survival meant making impossible decisions. "I don't want to be part of this world, Marco," she said quietly, her voice wavering for a brief moment before she caught herself. "But you're right. I don't have much of a choice, and I can't do this alone." Marco nodded, his face unreadable, but there was something in his eyes, something that suggested he understood the depth of what she was feeling. "Then let me help. Let me show you how to navigate it. You don't have to become like them, but you need to understand the rules of the game if you're going to make it." Sophia didn't reply right away. She was torn. She didn't want to surrender to the life her father had set out for her, but there was no denying that she couldn't fight this fight without understanding the terrain. The man who had been absent for so long was now the one pulling the strings, and she was stuck in the middle, struggling to break free from the chains that bound her. Taking a deep breath, Sophia looked out the window. The city stretched endlessly before her, its lights flickering like tiny beacons of hope in a sea of darkness. She had always wanted to leave this world behind, to escape the survivalist mentality she had learned on the streets. But now it seemed that the streets were coming for her in a different form, more refined, more dangerous. Her father's world wasn't one she could escape, not without the knowledge and the tools to fight back. "I'll learn," she said finally, her voice steady. "I'll learn what I need to survive, but I'm not going to become him. I refuse to be like my father." Marco's gaze softened, and for a moment, Sophia saw something in him. Something more than the cold, calculating man he often seemed to be. "You won't be like him, but you'll have to make decisions that go against everything you believe in if you want to survive. The question is, are you ready for that?" Sophia hesitated. She wasn't sure if anyone could truly be ready for the kind of decisions Marco was talking about, but she knew one thing: she had to be. There was no turning back now. "I'll do whatever it takes," she said, her voice firmer now, "but I won't lose myself in the process." Marco gave a slight nod, his eyes locking onto hers in silent understanding. "I won't let that happen." There was a brief moment of quiet between them, but it wasn't uncomfortable. For the first time since she had entered this world, Sophia felt like she wasn't entirely alone. Marco wasn't just a guide in this new, dangerous world. He was someone who understood the weight of the choices she was facing. He wasn't asking her to change who she was. He was asking her to survive, to adapt, and to do it on her own terms. A soft knock on the door interrupted their moment of quiet. Vincent appeared in the doorway, his expression unreadable as usual. "Your father wants to speak with you," he said simply, his tone matter-of-fact. Sophia's heart skipped a beat at the mention of her father. She had thought their meeting earlier was the end of it, but apparently it was just the beginning. There was more to this world than she had ever realized, and her father, her blood, was at the center of it all. "Are you ready?" Marco asked, his voice quiet but laced with meaning. Sophia nodded, her throat tight. She didn't know what this conversation would bring, but she had no choice but to face it. "I guess we'll see," she said, her words a mix of uncertainty and determination. Vincent led the way, and Sophia followed him down the long, silent hallway, each step echoing through the stillness. Her mind raced, replaying everything that had happened since her arrival at her father's mansion. It had only been a few days, but it felt like a lifetime. The path forward was murky, clouded with dangers and choices she hadn't expected. But she couldn't back out now. She had made her choice, and now she would have to live with it. They arrived at a large, imposing door. Vincent opened it with a simple motion, revealing a darkened room filled with rich, deep mahogany furniture. Her father sat behind a large desk, his posture commanding and unyielding. There was no warmth in his expression, but something about his presence was magnetic, a force that demanded attention. "Sophia," he said as she stepped inside, his voice cool and controlled. "I've been waiting for this moment." Her breath caught in her chest as she met his gaze. There was no going back now. She was about to enter a world where the only way out was to fight and to survive. "Sit down," her father said, his voice firm, but with a note of something else, something she couldn't quite place. Sophia's mind raced as she made her way to the chair across from him. She wasn't just a girl on the streets anymore. She was someone's daughter, a daughter of a man who ruled from the shadows. And now, she was about to learn what it meant to be his. Sophia sat across from her father, her back stiff against the plush leather chair. The room felt too big, too intimidating. The heavy silence between them hung in the air like a storm waiting to break. Her heart pounded in her chest, and her thoughts felt like a whirlwind, spinning in every direction, but never landing on something solid. Her father didn't speak right away. He simply watched her, his dark eyes calculating, as if he were studying her every movement, trying to read her in ways words never could. Sophia wanted to shrink under his gaze, but she forced herself to meet his eyes. She wouldn't let him see her fear. "You've been given a gift, Sophia," her father finally spoke, his voice deep, almost cold. "The world you've lived in, the life you've survived, it's nothing compared to what you can have now." Sophia clenched her jaw. "A gift?" she echoed, her voice laced with disbelief. "You call this a gift? You abandoned me. I had to survive on my own. There's nothing about that feels like a gift." Her father's gaze flickered for the briefest moment, a hint of something like regret passing through his eyes, but it was gone before Sophia could even be sure she had seen it. "It wasn't abandonment, Sophia," he said, his tone firmer now. "It was protection. You think I wanted you to live like that? No, but the life I lead, it's not one for children. It's dangerous, it's messy. I couldn't risk exposing you to that world until you were ready. And now, you are." Sophia swallowed hard, trying to keep the storm of emotions inside her from boiling over. She wanted to shout at him, to tell him he was wrong, that he had no right to call himself her father, but a part of her knew that nothing she said would change what had happened. The past was the past. The only thing she could control now was her future. "And now you think I'm ready?" she asked, her voice shaky but resolute. "Ready for what? To become part of your world? To become like you?" Her father's eyes darkened slightly. "You're my daughter, Sophia. That means you're part of my legacy. And I didn't bring you here to become like me. I brought you here because you have something I need. You have the strength to build something greater, something that can stand the test of time." Sophia's heart raced as she tried to make sense of his words. Her mind flashed back to the life she had known. Cold nights on the streets, constant hunger, fear always lurking in the shadows. That life had shaped her, had given her a toughness she hadn't realized until now. But was it enough to face the darkness of the world her father lived in? Was it enough to survive in the dangerous web of power and manipulation that had consumed him? "You think I'm going to build your empire?" Sophia asked, her voice a mixture of disbelief and anger. "You think I'm going to take your place, Live a life where loyalty is everything, where betrayal is just a way of doing business? Her father leaned forward, his eyes sharp and unwavering. Yes, I do, but I'm not asking you to. Follow in my footsteps. I'm asking you to build your own path. The world you've lived in, that's the past. I want you to be a part of the future. Your future. Sophia's breath caught in her throat as her father's words hit her like a tidal wave. The future. She had spent so many years trying to survive, to make it through each day without losing herself to the darkness. And now she was being asked to forge a future she had never imagined. I can't just let go of everything I've known, she said, quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. I've fought my entire life to stay alive, to not become a victim, to not be controlled. And now you want me to join your world, to become part of it? How do I know it won't swallow me whole? Her father's gaze softened just for a moment. I know you're scared, I know you don't trust me, but I'm not asking you to trust me. I'm asking you to trust yourself. You've survived all these years on your own. That's more than most people can say. Sophia looked down at her hands, feeling the weight of his words pressing down on her. She had always fought for survival, never considering the possibility that one day she might have more to fight for, that she might have a choice, one that could shape the rest of her life. Your father's right, you know, Marco's voice interrupted, soft but strong. He had entered the room without her realizing, standing near the door. You have the strength to do this, Sophia, but it's your choice. No one is forcing you. You have to decide what you want, what kind of person you want to be. Sophia's head snapped up to look at Marco. He wasn't offering her easy answers, but he was offering something important, the freedom to choose her own path, even if that path led into the darkness of her father's world. Her father sat back in his chair, observing her closely. The world I offer you won't be kind, Sophia, but nothing worth having ever is. Sophia took a deep breath, her mind racing. She was standing at a crossroads, the weight of everything she had ever known and everything she could become hanging in the balance. Her past had shaped her into someone capable of surviving this world, but could she thrive in it? Could she hold on to the pieces of herself that mattered while building a new life from the wreckage? I don't know if I can ever truly trust you, Sophia said quietly, her voice trembling with emotion, but I know that I can't go back, and I can't do this alone. Her father nodded, a slight smile tugging at the corner of his lips. That's all I'm asking for. Trust yourself, Sophia, and everything else will follow. Sophia didn't know if she was ready for this life, but for the first time in years, she felt a sense of purpose, a direction that could lead her somewhere. She wasn't going to become her father, but she wasn't going to let fear or weakness define her either. She would carve her own path, one step at a time. And in this world where power ruled and survival was everything, she would learn to thrive, even if it meant walking a fine line between light and shadow. The weight of her father's words lingered long after their conversation had ended. Sophia had left his office with a sense of quiet determination, but also an undeniable fear. The world she had been thrust into was too vast, too dangerous to fully understand. Yet, as much as she wanted to escape, the truth was inescapable. She couldn't run from this. She had no illusions anymore. Her father's world was not a place of mercy, and trust was a luxury no one could afford. She had seen enough of the dark corners of the world to know that survival meant more than just staying alive. It meant taking control. It meant power. Marco had stayed silent most of the way back to the apartment, his face unreadable, as if he were waiting for her to make the first move. Sophia could feel his eyes on her, but she didn't speak. She wasn't sure what to say. After everything her father had told her, every revelation about her place in this world, Sophia had no idea who she was anymore. She was stuck between the girl she had been, the one who had fought for survival, and the woman she was supposed to become, the one who would navigate a world of ruthless power. They reached the apartment in silence, and as soon as they stepped inside, Sophia collapsed onto the couch. She felt like the world was pressing in on her, suffocating her, but she didn't know how to escape it. Her thoughts were a tangle of doubt and resolve. She had made the choice. She would stay, she would fight, but at what cost? Marco sat across from her, his gaze steady. I know you're struggling with this, he said, his voice soft but firm. But you need to understand something. You can't survive in this world without making sacrifices. It's not about being good or bad, it's about power. And the price of power is everything. Sophia looked up at him, her eyes searching his face for any sign of empathy, but his expression remained neutral. He wasn't here to comfort her. He was here to prepare her for the harsh reality she was about to face. I don't want to lose myself in this, Sophia whispered, the words barely escaping her lips. I don't want to become just another puppet in your father's game. Marco's gaze softened slightly, but his words remained grounded in truth. You won't become a puppet. You'll make your own choices, but every choice has a consequence. The harder the choice, the greater the cost. Your father, the people he surrounds himself with, they won't make it easy, but you have the power to shape this, Sophia, to shape your own future. But you have to be ready to do whatever it takes. Sophia felt a knot tighten in her stomach. What Marco was saying made sense, but it also terrified her. She had always fought to keep her autonomy, to retain control over her life. But in this world, control wasn't given freely. It had to be taken, and at times, it would require breaking pieces of herself to do it. She closed her eyes, trying to steady her breathing, trying to center herself. I didn't ask for this life, she said quietly, almost to herself. I didn't ask to be dragged into a world where the only rule is power, where every decision is a matter of life and death. Marco's eyes never left her face. None of us ask for this life, Sophia, but we're here now. And now, it's about survival. It's about learning how to control your place in it before it controls you. The words hit her hard, reverberating through her chest. Survival. She had survived the streets, but this world was different, so much darker. The stakes were higher, and the consequences far more severe. Just as Sophia was about to speak again, the door opened. Vincent stepped inside, his face impassive as always, but the tension in his posture was unmistakable. He had news. Sophia, he said, his voice low, your father wants to see you again. There's something he needs to discuss. Sophia stood up immediately, her heart racing. What is it? Vincent didn't answer right away. Instead, he just nodded for her to follow him. She glanced at Marco, who remained silent, but gave her a slight nod of encouragement. This was it. There was no turning back now. Sophia followed Vincent through the familiar hallways of the mansion, each step feeling heavier than the last. The air seemed to grow colder, as if the very walls of the house could feel the shift in the atmosphere. When they arrived at her father's office, Sophia didn't hesitate. She walked in without looking back, knowing that every decision she made from here on out would shape her future. Her father was sitting behind his desk again, the same cold, calculating expression on his face. But this time, there was a different energy in the room, a sense of finality. Something was about to change. Sophia, he said, his voice firm, but with an undertone of something like approval. I've been thinking about your place in all this, about what you'll do next. Sophia stood in front of his desk, trying to steady her breath. What do you mean? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Her father looked at her for a long moment, his eyes weighing her every movement. You've made your decision to stay. Now, it's time to understand the responsibilities that come with it. You're going to be tested, Sophia, not just by me, but by the people who will be watching you, the ones who want to see if you're truly worthy of your name. Sophia's pulse quickened. Tested? How? Her father leaned forward, his fingers steepled in front of him. You're going to start learning what it means to be part of this family. I'm going to put you in charge of a small operation. It'll be a trial to see if you have the strength to handle the weight of what's coming. Sophia's mind spun. She had known her father would test her, but she hadn't expected this so soon. What kind of operation? Her father's eyes glinted with something darker, something that Sophia had come to recognize as the cold, calculating force of his world. It's a test of loyalty, Sophia. We need to see if you can make the hard choices. This is where you prove you can survive in this life. If you pass, then we can move forward. Sophia's stomach churned. She knew this was a test, but the implications of what her father was asking were more than she was prepared for. There was no room for weakness, no room for hesitation. She would have to choose her family, her loyalty, or her humanity. She took a deep breath, her voice steady despite the uncertainty. What's the operation? Her father's gaze never wavered. I'll give you the details soon, but understand this, Sophia. There's no going back. You're either part of this world, or you're not. And once you step in, you'll answer to no one but me. Sophia nodded, a cold chill running through her. This was it. The price of power was more than just survival. It was a choice between who she was and what she would become, and she was standing on the precipice, ready to make that choice. The days that followed her father's request felt like a blur. Every moment seemed more intense than the last, as if the world around her was closing in, forcing her to adapt quickly or risk being swallowed whole. Sophia had never imagined her life would be like this, walking the fine line between survival and destruction. Yet here she was, standing on the edge, staring into the abyss. She had barely slept since the meeting with her father. The pressure was suffocating, the expectations unbearable. Marco had been by her side, quietly observing, giving her space to process everything. But there was no time to dwell. Every moment felt like it was slipping through her fingers, and she knew that if she didn't take control of her destiny, it would be taken from her. Her father's words still rang in her mind. There's no going back. It was a reminder that there would be no escape from the life she was being thrust into. This was her test, a trial that would determine if she was truly ready to become part of his world. A world where power wasn't just desired, it was demanded. One evening, after a long day of training with Marco, Sophia was summoned again to her father's office. She didn't hesitate this time. The nerves that had once gripped her with fear were slowly turning into something else, something colder, more determined. She had chosen this life. Now, she would see it through. When she entered the office, her father was already waiting. He didn't look up at first, but his presence in the room was all-consuming. The air felt thicker here, as if the walls themselves were watching her, waiting for her next move. "You're ready for your first assignment," her father said without preamble, his voice as cold as ever. "It's time to see if you have what it takes." Sophia nodded, her hands clasped in front of her. "What do I need to do?" Her father looked at her now, his eyes calculating, the weight of his gaze pressing down on her. "There's a rival operation in the city. They've been encroaching on our territory, stealing clients and making moves that threaten our business. It's time we send them a message." Sophia's heart skipped a beat. She had known something like this was coming, but hearing it laid out so plainly sent a shiver down her spine. "What do you want me to do?" she asked, her voice steady, though her mind raced. Her father's expression remained unreadable. "You will make sure they understand who they're dealing with. This will be a direct confrontation. You'll make contact with their leader, make them understand that crossing us will come at a high price." Sophia's stomach churned. She wasn't sure if she was ready for this, confronting another powerful player in this city, someone who might not hesitate to strike back. She had never been trained for this type of cold, calculated violence, but the truth was, she didn't have a choice. Her father had set the stage, and now it was up to her to play her part. "How do you want me to handle it?" Sophia asked, her voice quiet but firm as she tried to steady her nerves. Her father gave her a small, knowing smile. "You'll figure it out. I trust you have the instincts to handle this. Just make sure it's done. I don't want to hear about failure." Sophia felt the weight of his words. Failure wasn't an option. It couldn't be. Marco entered the room just as her father finished speaking, his presence a stark contrast to her father's cold demeanor. He didn't speak right away, but there was something in his eyes, something that Sophia couldn't quite place. He was concerned, but he wasn't going to stop her. Not now. "Sophia, I know this isn't easy," Marco said, his voice low, "but this is what you have to do. You have to show them who you are. Your father isn't asking for mercy. He's asking you to take control." Sophia met his gaze, her chest tightening. She had always relied on her instincts, her ability to survive in the streets, but now, in this world, survival wasn't just about avoiding danger. It was about wielding power, striking first, showing that weakness wasn't a luxury. She swallowed, nodding slowly. "I understand." Her father stood, his movements deliberate. He gestured toward the door. "This is your first real test, Sophia. I'll be watching closely." With that, she turned and left the room, her thoughts whirling. The mission felt like a daunting challenge, but the words her father had spoken were clear. There was no room for hesitation. She couldn't afford to falter. Marco followed her down the hall, his presence a silent support. "You've got this," he said, his voice calm but intense. "We'll make sure you're prepared." As they arrived at the parking garage, Sophia felt her pulse quicken. This was the moment. Her heart hammered in her chest as she climbed into the car with Marco. They didn't speak as the car sped through the city streets. Sophia's mind raced with questions, doubts, and the overwhelming reality of the situation. She had been given no other choice but to act. Her future depended on the outcome of this mission. The car pulled up outside an old, run-down building in a part of the city Sophia knew all too well. It was dark, desolate, and the air had a sense of danger to it. This was where the rival group operated. Marco turned to her. "You don't have to do this alone. I'll be right behind you." Sophia nodded, but she didn't feel the relief she had hoped for. The truth was, this was her test, her chance to prove she could survive in her father's world. If she didn't succeed, everything she had fought for would fall apart. She stepped out of the car, the cold night air biting at her skin, and made her way toward the entrance of the building. Her mind was clear now. There was no room for fear. She had no choice but to be ruthless, to take control. The door opened with a creak as she entered. Inside, the air smelled of smoke and dust. It was silent, too silent. Sophia's footsteps echoed in the empty space as she made her way deeper into the building, and then she saw him, the leader of the rival operation. He was standing in the shadows, his face partially hidden, but Sophia could feel his eyes on her. She knew this was the moment that would define who she was in this new world. Sophia stood in the dimly lit room, the air heavy with tension. Every instinct in her told her to stay alert, to be ready for anything. The figure in front of her, a man she'd never met, but whose reputation preceded him, remained still in the shadows, his presence filling the room like a storm waiting to break. Her heart beat steadily in her chest, the rhythm of it grounding her. This wasn't the streets she'd known, where every corner held a potential threat. This was a different kind of danger, a world where power was measured by more than just survival. Here, power was taken, often with violence, sometimes with words, but always with certainty. The man stepped forward, his movements deliberate. As he emerged from the darkness, his face came into view, a man in his late 40s with sharp features and a calculating look in his eyes. He wasn't a stranger to her. Sophia had heard whispers of him before. Raúl Vázquez, the leader of the rival faction her father had warned her about. He was known for his ruthlessness, and yet there was an unsettling calmness to him now, as if this confrontation was nothing more than a chess match. "Ah, Sophia," Raúl's voice was smooth, almost too smooth. "I've heard a lot about you. Your father's daughter. You've certainly made a name for yourself, haven't you?" Sophia didn't flinch. She had been prepared for this moment for days, even if she wasn't sure she was ready. She had walked into this world with eyes wide open, knowing full well that the game her father played had no mercy. "I'm here on my father's behalf," she said, her voice steady, her words carrying the weight of the responsibility she had been given. "I've been asked to make sure you understand the consequences of crossing him." Raúl tilted his head slightly, his lips curling into a knowing smile. "Crossing him, you say? And what exactly are the consequences, Sophia? What are you prepared to do? Do you really think you can stand here and threaten me without knowing what kind of man I am?" His words struck like a challenge, a test to see if she had the backbone to back up her father's name. Sophia stood tall, not allowing the doubt to creep into her mind. She had made her choice. She would not let fear control her actions now. "I don't need to know what kind of man you are," Sophia replied, taking a step forward. "What I know is that you've been encroaching on our territory, and I'm here to make sure that ends, one way or another." Raúl's eyes flickered with something. Amusement? Perhaps a recognition of the fire in her that reminded him of her father. But whatever it was, he didn't show it for long. Instead, he took a slow step toward her, his presence intimidating, but Sophia didn't back down. "You don't scare me, girl," he said, his voice low, almost threatening. "You're just a pawn in your father's game. He can send you here, but what makes you think you're in control? What makes you think you're anything more than his errand girl?" Sophia's breath caught in her throat. The words stung, but she knew they were meant to rattle her, to make her question her place in this world. She had heard them all before, on the streets, in the faces of people who thought they could break her, but she had survived worse. "I'm not just a pawn," Sophia said, her voice gaining strength with each word. "I'm his daughter, and that means something in this world. It means I'm not here to beg for your respect. I'm here to make sure you understand that crossing us comes with consequences." Raúl's smile faltered for a fraction of a second, but it was enough to show Sophia that she had struck a nerve. He stepped back, eyes narrowing. "You think you can make me fear your father?" he sneered. "You think you can walk in here and just take control of my operation? You're nothing, Sophia. Nothing." The words hung in the air like smoke, but Sophia didn't let them burn her. Instead, she took a deep breath, her mind clearing as she focused on the task at hand. This wasn't just about her father's power. It was about showing Raúl that she, too, could play the game. She was a part of this world now, and she would have to prove herself, one decision at a time. "You're wrong," she said, her voice cool and steady. "I don't need to make you fear my father. I just need you to understand one thing. You've been warned, and if you choose to ignore that warning, you'll regret it. It's not a game anymore, Raúl. It's real. It's life or death." For a moment, Raúl was silent, his eyes locked onto hers. Sophia could feel the weight of his gaze, could sense the wheels turning in his mind. She knew this wasn't just about territory or power. It was about respect, about proving who held the real cards in this world. He finally broke the silence, but his words were laced with menace. "You've got guts. I'll give you that. But you're still nothing. Your father's empire won't protect you forever. One day, you'll realize that." Sophia's pulse raced, but she kept her voice steady. "Maybe. But for now, this is my world, and you've just made your move. You'll regret it." Raoul said nothing more. Instead, he turned and walked toward the shadows, his retreat as deliberate as his approach. Sophia stood there for a moment, her heart pounding in her chest, the adrenaline still coursing through her veins. She had done it. She had walked into the lion's den and come out standing. Marco, who had been quietly observing from the doorway, stepped forward as Raoul disappeared into the shadows. "You handled yourself well," he said, his voice low, but there was a note of respect in it. "But this isn't over. Raoul won't forget what happened here, and neither will your father." Sophia nodded, her gaze still focused on the spot where Raoul had stood. She had passed her first test, but she knew this was just the beginning. There would be many more challenges ahead, many more choices that would shape her future. The world she had entered was unforgiving, and the price of power was steep. But Sophia had learned something important tonight. She wasn't just a daughter in this world, she was a force to be reckoned with. The days that followed her encounter with Raoul felt like a quiet before the storm. Sophia had proven herself in the confrontation, but she knew that this was only the beginning. Raoul's operation wasn't just going to roll over. He wouldn't forget what happened, and neither would her father's enemies, who were watching every move she made. The power she had briefly tasted now hung over her like a storm cloud, heavy with the expectation that it would only be a matter of time before she had to prove herself again. Marco had been by her side since the meeting, giving her space to breathe, but also ensuring that she stayed sharp. The city felt different now, quieter, as if everyone knew something big was coming, but no one dared to speak it aloud. It wasn't long before she received another summons. Her father wanted to see her again. Sophia wasn't sure what to expect this time. She had learned quickly that in her father's world, nothing was ever as it seemed. But as she made her way to his office, her mind couldn't help but replay the moment when Raoul had mocked her, when he had tried to strip her of her sense of self. Raoul hadn't been wrong about everything. She was still learning how to balance the ruthless world her father lived in with the person she was becoming. Could she truly maintain her humanity here, or would she be swallowed whole by the darkness? When she entered her father's office, he was seated at his desk, his usual cold demeanor in place. The room felt heavy, as it always did when he was present. His gaze flicked up as she walked in, and for a brief moment Sophia could see the faintest glimmer of approval in his eyes, but it vanished just as quickly. "You've done well, Sophia," her father said, his voice smooth and calculated. "Raoul won't forget this, but he will respect you now. You've made a name for yourself. It's a start." Sophia nodded, her posture stiff. She wasn't sure if his words were a compliment or a warning. Everything in his world felt like a test, and she knew she had barely scratched the surface. "You'll have more challenges ahead," her father continued, "but first I need to ensure that we solidify our position here. There's another matter that requires your attention." Sophia raised an eyebrow. "What kind of matter?" Her father leaned forward, his fingers steepled in front of him. "Another rival, not like Raoul's operation, but someone more subtle, someone who has been quietly undermining us from within. I want you to find out who they are. You need to make sure they understand that their actions won't go unnoticed." Sophia's heart skipped a beat. This wasn't the direct confrontation she had faced with Raoul. This was something quieter, more insidious, but it also meant one thing. Trust had been broken. There was a mole in their midst. "Who?" she asked, her voice calm despite the storm brewing in her chest. Her father's eyes narrowed. "I don't know yet, but I trust you'll figure it out. Start with the lower-level operatives. Keep your eyes open. It's someone close." "That's all I can say for now." Sophia's mind raced. She had been sent to eliminate threats from the outside, but now she had to root out betrayal from within. The people she worked with, the ones who were supposed to be allies, might be the very ones working against her. She wasn't just playing a game of survival anymore. She was playing a game of trust, and in this world, trust was the rarest commodity. As she turned to leave, her father's voice stopped her. "Don't let your guard down, Sophia. The game is always changing. Just because you've won one round doesn't mean you've won the war." The weight of his words settled in her chest, and she nodded. She understood all too well now that nothing in this world was guaranteed. There were no permanent victories, only the fleeting sense of control before the next challenge came crashing in. As Sophia left her father's office, Marco fell into step beside her, his face unreadable as always. He had been watching her closely these past few days, and Sophia knew that whatever he was thinking, he wasn't going to share it unless he had to. "You heard what your father said?" Marco asked, his tone quiet. "I did," Sophia replied, her voice steady. "There's a mole in the organization, someone betraying us from within." Marco's eyes darkened slightly. "It's never easy when the enemy is one of your own, but if anyone can figure it out, it's you." Just don't trust anyone too easily. Sophia met his gaze, her jaw clenched. She had learned that lesson the hard way. Trust was a luxury she couldn't afford, not in her father's world. Who do you think it could be? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Marco hesitated for a moment, his eyes scanning the hallway, as if the walls themselves might be listening. There are too many to know for sure, he said finally, but I'd start with the ones closest to your father. They're the ones who have the most to lose if his power falters. They might think they can get away with it, but they'll have to answer for it, sooner or later. Sophia nodded, her mind already working through the possibilities. She had to be careful. One wrong move, and the entire house of cards her father had built would come crashing down. That night, Sophia went over her list of potential suspects, the lower-level operatives, the ones who had been in the shadows, the ones who moved quietly but held power. She'd have to be smart, subtle. It wasn't enough to eliminate the threat. She had to find out who was pulling the strings behind the scenes. As she sat alone in her room, her thoughts racing, she realized something. This was a test, just like everything else. But this time it was different. This wasn't about proving herself in a direct confrontation. This was about trust. And trust was the most dangerous game of all. The following days were filled with uncertainty. Sophia knew the stakes had risen, and this time, it wasn't just about proving herself in the eyes of her father. It was about survival. She couldn't afford to trust anyone, not even those closest to her. The idea that someone inside their organization was working against them ate at her, gnawing away at the small remnants of trust she had left. She spent her time observing, keeping her distance from the others and watching every person who came and went from her father's compound. Her instincts, the same instincts that had kept her alive on the streets, were now more crucial than ever, but they were also telling her something she didn't want to hear. This was a game she couldn't afford to lose. Marco had been unusually quiet these past few days, giving her space to navigate this new challenge. She couldn't blame him. She knew he was just as on edge as she was. But the silence between them wasn't just a product of the tension. It was something else, something deeper. Marco had always been there, offering advice, but now it felt as though even he was being careful around her. There was something unsettling about the whole situation. The mole could be anyone. It could be someone she had worked with every day, someone she had trusted, or worse, someone close to her father. The more Sophia thought about it, the more she realized that the walls were closing in on her. Everyone had their own interests. Everyone had something to protect, and in a world built on loyalty and betrayal, she had to remember that nothing was as it seemed. That night, Sophia decided to go deeper. She would have to take matters into her own hands. Marco, as always, was watching from a distance, his gaze calculating. She had noticed his silence had only grown since their last conversation, but she didn't have time to dwell on it. Her mind was focused entirely on the task at hand. The mole. Finding them was her priority. She visited the underground meeting rooms of her father's empire, the places where business dealings and transactions took place out of sight. The whispers and murmurs of the lower operatives filled the air as Sophia walked through the hallways, her presence barely acknowledged by most. She had learned to blend in when necessary, and tonight, that skill would serve her well. One of the rooms she entered was dimly lit, the walls lined with monitors tracking the various operations that were happening across the city. Sophia had been here before, but tonight it felt different, like a predator circling its prey. She needed to find the weak link in the chain, the person whose actions didn't add up, whose loyalties might be compromised. It didn't take long for her to spot him. Thomas. He was one of her father's trusted men, an enforcer who had been working for the family for years. He was often the one sent to handle the most delicate situations, the ones that required a firm hand. But tonight, as he sat alone in the corner, his eyes darting nervously around the room, Sophia felt a chill run down her spine. There was something off about him. She approached him carefully, her footsteps light on the concrete floor. He didn't notice her at first, his focus entirely on a document in front of him. Sophia stood beside him, crossing her arms as she waited for him to acknowledge her presence. When he finally looked up, his face immediately tensed, his expression faltering for just a second. "Sophia," he said, his voice tight, "what are you doing here?" "I could ask you the same thing," Sophia replied coolly, her eyes narrowing. "I thought you'd be keeping a low profile tonight, considering the situation." He swallowed visibly, looking away from her gaze. "Just keeping things in order. You know how it is." Sophia's instincts told her otherwise. She had seen enough of people like Thomas to recognize when they were lying. He was good at hiding his emotions, but he wasn't good enough to hide the fear in his eyes. the way his fingers drummed nervously on the table, the subtle yet noticeable shift in his body language when she entered the room. "You're nervous," Sophia said, her voice soft, almost too calm. "What are you hiding?" Thomas stiffened, the mask of confidence he wore slipping slightly. "I'm not hiding anything," he said, his voice too defensive. "You should know by now that I'm loyal to your father. I'm one of the best men he has." Sophia's gaze never wavered. "I'm not here to question your loyalty. I'm here because you've been acting suspiciously. I've seen it before. People who are scared try to cover their tracks. People who are guilty do the same." The words stung, and for a moment, Thomas's mask broke completely. His face twisted in discomfort, the lie becoming too heavy to maintain. He opened his mouth as if to say something, but the words caught in his throat. Sophia stepped closer, her voice barely above a whisper. "Tell me what's going on, Thomas. I won't ask again." There was a long pause before Thomas finally spoke, his voice strained, as if every word took every ounce of his will to say. "I didn't mean for it to get this far," he admitted, his voice breaking. "But there are others, people within the organization. They're making moves behind your father's back. They want power. They want to take control, and they're using me." Sophia's heart skipped a beat. She had suspected as much, but hearing it confirmed made the situation feel much more real and far more dangerous. She had just uncovered the first layer of the web that had been spun around her, and it was only the beginning. "Who?" she asked, her voice a low, dangerous whisper. "Who is behind this?" Thomas hesitated, his eyes flickering nervously. "I can't say. I'm not the one in charge. I was just told what to do. I didn't have a choice." Sophia's hand clenched into a fist at her side. She knew the answer would come with consequences. Thomas had betrayed them, but he wasn't the mastermind. He was a pawn in someone else's game, and now she had to find out who was pulling the strings. "I think you have a choice now, Thomas," Sophia said coldly, her eyes locking onto his with a sense of finality. "And if you want to stay alive, you'll help me find them, or I'll make sure you never see the light of day again." The silence between them was thick, the weight of her words sinking in. Thomas nodded, his fear palpable. It was clear he didn't have a choice anymore. Sophia had already decided what would happen next, and the real game had just begun.
Hope you enjoyed the story. Comment where you're watching from, leave a like, and subscribe to the channel.